because I need to mark. Got it on this one? So they've got to be reviewed annually by the Finance Committee, but then they've got to be taken to the Admin Council for the Admin Council to approve any changes that are being made. So we want to be really careful that we don't make changes as the Finance Committee without taking it to the Admin Council. They are basically the authority of the church as we look through it. So remember this paragraph 258.4c. This is where this really drives from. And in the back of your handout, I've got a set of internal controls that we're going to kind of talk about a little as we're going along. In these internal controls, we've got to look at the responsibilities and the processes. Without one, you can't have the other. So who's responsible? What does the committee do? What does the pastor do? What does the treasurer do? What does the financial secretary do? And then what do the rest of the committee members do? And then we've got to know the process. How do I get checks written? How do I get that money dispersed? How does the money get into the bank so I can get the money out? About credit cards, the annual audit. So we're going to really drive around today through this Zoom, and we're going to start acknowledging there's ways we do things. We're going to look at all of it, and we're going to end back up at that annual audit, because the audit is the checkup to be sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. So as we think about the general objectives of internal controls, we're safeguarding the assets. God gave us the ability to know how to safeguard those assets. We do that by making sure we have reliable and accurate financial records. Christopher says people give agencies, churches, groups, when they trust the people that are receiving it, and it's in the same relationship. You know, if I really like something, but I'm kind of worried about they're going to spend the money like I want them to, I'm going to give them money because God calls me to give money to that. But if I'm a little worried they're not going to spend it where they need to spend it, I'm not going to give it. I'm going to put my tithe and my gifts after that in a place that I know it's going to go where the people say it's going. So we've got to be sure we've got reliable financial statements and they're accurate, and we comply with the church policies. Now, when we get to complying with the church policies, we got to realize we're talking about Aldersgate's policies. We're talking about the district policies. We're talking about the conference policies, and we're talking about the general church, because everything we do is affected by one or the other. And then if the IRS doesn't just jump in on top of us and say, okay, now have you done your 1099s? Now have you done your W-2s? Have you done those things? So there's all kind of policies out there, but we start with the Aldersgate policies because that's where the reliability is coming from and what we're doing here in this church at this time. We got to be sure we have accurate recording. Don't record without a receipt. Don't pay a bill without a request. We've got to be sure we have accurate recording, and then the reliable reports will come along. And when I have reliable reports, then I can budget, I can plan. But if I've got we got an about, that's not going to do me any good. When I was in Lexington, Cynthia, as the treasurer of the church over there, George Patterson was our treasurer. And I went to him one day as the youth director, and I said, George, do I have enough money to go to this youth event? Have I got enough left in my budget? And he said, are you going to have a prayer? I said, and I didn't say anything about praying. I asked about my money. Can I go? And he said, are you going to have a prayer? And I said, that's none of your business what you're doing. You are the treasurer. You will tell me how much money I've got, and you will tell me what I spend and what I can't. Now let's re-ask the question. And he said, well, you're feisty. I said, no, I'm working for God. And I'm going to do it God's way. I needed him to tell me what I had. And so then I left and I let him fume a little bit. And then I went back in, stuck my head in the door and said, by the way, we're going to pray. Don't worry. And matter of fact, I got a preacher lined up at Eureka Springs. We headed to Eureka Springs to the Passion Play. I said, and I got a preacher lined up there. So yeah, we're going to pray. We're going to teach. We're going to have a great time. And we're going to go to the milkshake shop. You want to go? We got to be sure we've got efficiency of these operations. If we waste money, we're not providing for those outside of here, the least, the last, the lost, the hungry, those that need God. So we got to be sure that we've got effective planning and budgeting so that we can do the work that God calls us to do. The separation of duties is really important, and this is where your internal controls guide this. Because if I can write the checks and make the deposits and authorize the payments and reconcile the bank statements and do the financial statements, God's church just became David's church. That's not what God meant. So we've got to have authorization of transactions. The budget is our main authorization. If you don't have a budget, you cannot write a check. If I don't have adequate budget, I cannot write the checks. So I've got to have the authorization to know how to get that. And somebody's got to look at it and say, yes, we have the money. Yes, we have a line item. Or who's finance chair? Who is the finance chair of the church? You are. So if we don't have a budget, then you're going to have to pull together the committee and make a recommendation to the admin council. Hey, y'all are wanting to do thus and so. We don't have a budget, but could y'all authorize a budget? Here's where we believe it can. And so you hand it off to the admin council after the finance committee has made its discussion, and then we got it. We go forward. We got to have that authorization. What I like to do with the budget is once I have my budget in place, I like to go down the side and say, here's who can authorize payments out of each of these line items. So that I know as treasurer, if I see that name on there, it's my job to pay it. Whether I like it or not, what they're spending doesn't matter to me. What they're spending has got to be authorized by somebody. So kind of ending up in that budget, and we'll talk about that again in a few minutes. How we authorize those transactions, and then where are the assets? Who has custody of them? Should blank checks just sitting out somewhere? They need to be put away, don't they? Who should have access to them? Not the financial secretary. The financial secretary is getting the money in. It's got to be the treasurer that unlocks the box to get the checks out to write the checks. And just as a side note, I know this doesn't happen here, but I've seen this in many of my churches. Oh, we got 8 or 10 signed checks back there so we can move forward with those blank signed checks. That just gives me total heart failure when I hear that. So who has custody of the assets? Internal controls have got to be beneficial financially and emotionally. If you're a small church, one of our little churches that have got 2 or 3 or 4 people in it, they don't need all these great big policies. They just need to have enough policies that separates the duties. But I take the biggest church there is out there, and I've got to be sure whatever it costs, it doesn't exceed the benefit of the internal controls. And they cannot be emotionally driven, but yet they've got to be emotionally driven enough so that people care. Emotion equals caring. So you got to remove temptation from misappropriation. Had a theft in one of our churches, and they had set it up to where the little guy could write the checks and he could sign the checks, but he had to have another signature. They didn't realize the little guy knew how to copy the signature, store it in his computer, write the check, and then send it right on. This little guy, I was around the day he was born. That was one of the hardest things I ever did, was call the police on him and have him hauled out. That was tough. I knew his daddy. I knew his mother. I knew the whole crew. But he had done wrong. The temptation was there. They just didn't realize his abilities. And anything that needed to be out there, we got to make sure we don't have a cloud of suspicion, because the worst thing in the world is for you to get a call, or for Cynthia to get a call, or the admin council chair to get a call that says, I am absolutely positive somebody's stealing money out of that church. There's no reason we don't have money in the account. I put in $20 every week. We should have plenty of money to pay the $10,000 electric bill. Well, your $20 isn't quite going to do it, but it sure is going to help do it. But if I say that, that treasurer is writing checks to pay her own electric bill, what have I done? I have set that fight up. That cloud of suspicions there. So we got to figure out how we keep these things moved away from each other so that nobody can accuse. Now, they can accuse, as Clifford Ammons tells me all the time, They can file a lawsuit, they can accuse you, but is it any truth or does it look like any truth to it? And Maureen can tell us that well as a lawyer. We know anybody can sue us. We know anybody can bring us to task, but is it reasonable what they're saying? And can we show them how we're more reasonable? We got to take that cloud of suspicion away. We got to save time and expense in recording the reconstruction. My biggest fear with this war for us is that is somebody going to come through the records of the annual conference, and are they going to send that malware in there, lock down all of my electronic files, and lock down, Cynthia, quite honestly, the Board of Ordained Ministry files. The bishop's trying to make appointments, and if everything gets locked down, how in the world are we going to find our way to look at these things and we don't have the money with which to pay? That concerns me, this cloud of suspicion. So I say to you, with them talking about the best way to get to the United States is through hacking our computers and using ransomware, be careful with what you got. This is really a time to look hard at that and make sure we're safe. Reconstructing is a problem. I had one situation where I heard money was stolen from a place by a hacker. And they said, okay, we'll give you files back for $50,000. So they gave them back. The insurance company said, okay, you got to do this, this, and this. This is the only way you're going to protect yourself. And the people said, well, that's just too expensive. And they didn't do it. Guess what happened 2 weeks later? They got the files again. And when they got the files, the price that time was $5 million. They realized it would take them about $100,000 to reconstruct the records. Do you realize the $100,000, how many people remained hungry that night? Do you realize how many people were not able to care for themselves and care for their children in these single parent families? You see, it's got to all come back to how do we protect these? So that's the reconstruction piece. We got to improve error detection. You just got to have that gut feeling that this is good. This is working. If I go in and look in my days of auditing, and I audited for 30 years, when I go into audit, it wasn't as much to me in my first couple of days to look through and be sure they were following the internal controls, but to get that gut feeling, does this look okay? Were there 24 checks cut for the treasurer of the company for their payroll? If there was 36 or 48, I began to ask questions because the policy would say paid semi-monthly. We got to be sure we can watch that error detection. We got to reduce confrontations. Lord have mercy. The news can work on the United Methodist Church. They can do that without our help, but we let a theft happen. And then what does it do? It hits the paper. So-and-so church got hacked. The secretary stole the money. We can kill ourselves with bad publicity. We don't need the help of somebody stealing from us. So we want to be very careful on those confrontations. Board division. Lord have mercy. Have y'all ever been to a meeting where everybody agreed on everything? It didn't even happen when Cynthia came as the pastor of the church. It didn't happen when I was elected as treasurer. There's somebody going to say no, just for the fun of saying no a lot of times. And I'm sure that's when they said no on Cynthia. It was just kind of push a little on her. But we can have division. And if we have division, then our internal controls are not strong enough to say there's not a problem in there. Then the division can be over the fight that we need these walls painted green instead of white. But it's not because we don't have enough money to paint. You see, we as the finance team have got to be sure those things are there. We got to reduce chances of losses. We should have looked at that young man's computer just as a general inspection, but he had full control to lock it down and he wouldn't give anybody a password. That should have been the first waving red flag out there. That embarrassment and that negative media, well, I don't even have to talk about that. We know how embarrassing it can be when the news media gets a hold of something, wraps it the way they want to wrap it, and then say, well, you know, the United Methodist Church claims to feed the hungry, care for the poor. And look at these people. They're right outside their door and they haven't even done anything for them. They don't realize those people are waiting to come in to pick up food, come in to receive clothing out of the clothes closet. So we've got to figure out how we're able to do those. So what you need to do as your assignment is review the suggested plan that's in your handout. But I want you to discern your reality. Where are we? As my youngest daughter used to say, but Daddy, really, where are we? So I really want you to figure out where you are. Do you have a written plan? Okay, it's confession time. Do we have a written plan of internal controls? Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so get your hands on it. And then what you need to do is, and I'm one of those that likes to put newsprint on the wall and say, okay, here's how we're receiving the offering on Sunday. Here's the way that David has written in a suggested internal control. That is not perfection. That did not come off of the mountain. Okay. It's not written in stone. It's typed on paper. Okay. So it's not perfect. So look at how you're doing it. Look at the suggested. And then on the third piece of newsprint, either say good to go or let's make changes, and work your way down through all the processes, all the responsibilities, and come up with either our plan is good or changes that need to be made. Develop the enhanced plan, ask the admin council, that's your governing body, for approval, and then continue to review. Make sure these things are happening. And if something comes up that doesn't work right, then definitely go back and say, what failed? What kept this from happening? And remember, annually, you've got to report to charge conference. We have our internal controls, and we have amended them as needed, or there was no amendments needed. So that's your first assignment. Let's be sure we check our internal controls. You're going to hear that time and again today, because y'all are a good church. You've got things where it needs to be, but are you reviewing? Are you monitoring what you're doing? And that's the piece that I'm hoping today, that you got up early and you came out. I hope you'll pick up something that will help you monitor better. So when we think about the finance committee and that responsibility, your job is to identify, perfect, and manage. Now, I went to Delta State, so I like to just say it easy. I got to raise the money, got to manage the money, and got to disperse the money. That's all my job is. Raise it, manage it, and disperse it. Now, if we do that, it will be so that the mission and the vision of the congregation can be achieved. Can be achieved. God never calls us to do anything that God hadn't first resources. So our job is to find those resources, get them in, keep them earning interest, keep them sitting in a place that's secure, so that we've got plenty to disperse when the time comes. The thing that drives me the craziest is to see a bank account drawing no interest, sitting in the bank with $20 or $30 or $40,000. I had one church I was looking at. Their little budget was $30,000. They had $40,000 in the checking account. I said, "You're not getting any interest on this. Why?" And they said, "Well, they only pay 0.25%. I said, 0.25% is better than 100% of nothing. I said, and if you take it to the foundation, you're going to get 2%. So you better start thinking through this. I suggest having 1/4 of money in the budget. My budget is $40,000. I want to keep a $10,000 balance so that I can work along. You may find that that's not quite enough, or you may find that's too much, which is your chance to change your route. I spend a lot of time sending money to the foundation, and then Cynthia picks the phone up and calls and say, "Hey, send some back. I gave you too much, but I got interest for 3 or 4 days, so I'm happy with them. You know, I get the interest, I keep running." So that the mission and vision of the congregation can be achieved. Look at this committee membership, if you will. We've got a chairperson, and the chairperson's job is to be the coach, to see that everybody's doing their part and not doing it for them. Because what happens when a chairperson takes over is the person is cheating God that's not doing the work of with the abilities God's given them. So the coach calls it to your attention, but the coach doesn't come in and take over, because the last thing we want to do is cheat you of the ability to do the work you're called to do. So the chairperson does that. They're not the king, they're not the queen. They got those over in England, and the queen's getting a little old, so they're going to be looking for a new one. So if somebody wants to be the king or queen, I just tell them, you need to go on over to England and apply, but you don't need to be the king or queen of the finance committee. The pastor is on here. The pastor is on here with full vote and full responsibility. Because how does a pastor lead if a pastor doesn't understand the finances? The worst thing in the world is for the pastor to have a wonderful dream of here's where I'd like to go. And it's absolutely impossible to go there. And they need to know that. The pastor needs to understand that. But the pastor also needs to understand if I'm sitting there with $1 million in the bank and I had this in a local church, the local church was just dying to build a new fellowship hall. And the treasurer convinced them they had no money. We just hadn't got any money. We can't build it, Pastor. They had bake sales. They had car washes. They had everything you can imagine. And finally raised that $30,000. And the treasurer died. And the books came back to the church. Do you know how much money they had in their building fund? $100,000. And they had raised that money and worked so hard. And all I could think was, shame on her, because she kept them from caring for the hungry, feeding the poor, because they were trying to raise the money to build. That's why the pastor's there. They're going to challenge you, but they're not going to challenge you beyond your means and figure out how we begin to move means. A lay member of the annual conference. Oh, I love that one, Maudine. That's one of my favorites. Because you get to come back and explain, here's what we're doing with those pesky mission shares. And some people call them something other than pesky mission shares, but I don't like to think about that. I like to think they say, oh, what wonderful mission shares, because it is 15 to 25% of your budget. So you need to know where it's going. And when people call and say, I hate to ask, but where does that line item go to? I say, oh, please don't hate to ask. Please say, what's the ministry happening on that line item? And the member of the annual conference comes back and is able to answer those questions. Chairperson on the council of board and the chairperson on the pastor parish relations and the trustee representative, all of them are on there. That's a good 75% of your budget. Don't you think the people that are in charge of these buildings, in charge of the staff, in charge of how we do ministry, they need to know what's going on. And they don't need to allow their committees to move into an area that there's not enough funding without saying, hey, we believe if we do this and so we can raise this money. And all of a sudden they're on that committee that's responsible for raising. And if they're responsible for raising, they have a dream of doing something. Then come on, brother and sister, let's sit down and figure out how we can do this. The chairperson of the ministry group is stewardship. If you do not have a stewardship committee, Cynthia, nominations needs to come together and put one together. Stewardship is not finances. They are absolutely two separate things. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge that, because stewardship is helping people understand why we give, how we save, where does it come from, and why do we tithe? Because the Bible says so. Well, you're at 2%. I want you at 10% tomorrow morning. That ain't happening. But the stewardship committee can work with the finance committee and the pastor to figure out how we get people to move. It's amazing. If you can get people to move 1% for 9 years, their 1% became a tithe. And please remember, tithes and offerings on Sunday morning only become offerings when the person exceeds the tithe. I give my tithes and then I give gifts to God beyond that. Joe May, y'all know Joe May. Joe May told me the story about being in church as a young child. And he was sitting there and they received, this is what I love about the African American church. Y'all are not scared to take up an offering. My white brothers and sisters, they just kind of cringe at taking the first offering. Y'all don't do that. Y'all know giving is important. And so Joe was telling me the story. They had received the first offering. It was for benevolences. And they had received the second offering. And they got to the third offering. This elderly lady was sitting by Joe. And she said, I am so excited. We're fixing to receive our tithes now. He said, oh, so that means you're going to get to give your offering. She said, oh, no. I'm only at 9%. She said, but next year I'm going to be at 10. She said, you just got to work step by step. And Joe watched that lady in the church. And sure enough, the next year when they called for the tithes and offerings, they didn't take them up. The people brought them to God and laid them on the altar. What a beautiful thought of bringing my tithes and giving it to God. And Joe said that lady went the next year and she came back with a huge smile on her face. That's what a stewardship committee does. It helps people give because God first gave it, calls that attention. Whereas finance is just making sure we're spending it with the right reasons, but you got to have everybody in the room together. So please get you a stewardship committee. The lay leader who works side by side with the pastor needs to understand the finances of the church and not challenge us beyond what we can do. And then if you've got a financial secretary and treasurer, and I know you do because they're required by the discipline, so I know you got one. And if you happen to have a business administrator, if any of them are paid, they're like me, they got plenty of voice. You know, man alive, I'll give all the information I need to give, but when it's time to vote, I can't vote because I'm sitting on the committee that's paying me. So if I'm paid, I can't vote, but I got plenty of voice inside of there. Now, what's paid? Paid is not adequately paid. Paid is paid. And so if you're giving somebody $75 as a Christmas gift, they've been paid. The IRS says if it's a de minimis fringe, it's okay. You know what de minimis means? Ain't worth flip. In the good old English of the Delta, ain't worth flip. I learned that at Delta State college class. $50, a ham, a turkey, a thank you. But as they move from the 50 to 75, and it kind of depends on the IRS agent at that time, kind of what they call the shot, that's where they begin to move it off. Now, if the treasurer is teaching Sunday school, youth, and is the treasurer, and you give them $50 Christmas gift because everybody gets a gift of $50 for the things they're doing for the church, all of a sudden the treasurer lost their vote because they're now making $150 from the church. So be careful with that. It's nitpicky, but remember, what are we trying to do? We're trying to make people understand where we're living and how we're spending their money. We want to be careful. We want to be accountable. So we have to look at nitpicky stuff. The committee shall supervise the work of the financial secretary and designate the counters. Y'all say who counts money. Do not allow the financial secretary to pick the people that count. Why? Oh, you know, those three people are counting, and every Sunday morning they go in and eat lunch. And I've been putting a $20 bill in, and I saw them buy their lunch with that $20. It was green, just like the one I put in the collection plate. And so now here we go. You got the complaint coming in. They're stealing money. No, they're not. No, they're not. All $20 are green. Let's drop them in the mud. But you have to make sure you're supervising the financial secretary. Your job is to supervise the financial secretary and the treasurer. Designate the counters, have the written policies, make provision for the audit. Now, we're going to allow the financial secretary and treasurer to do the audit? No, you can't audit. You can't even check yourself, much less audit yourself. So it's got to be somebody else that's lined up out there. Recommend where the depository should be. You can't decide where to put what bank to use. You can say, we want to use Trustmark Bank because we have 5 members here at that church that work there. We want to support the church. None of them are on the finance committee. That's fine. But if I'm the treasurer and I work at Trustmark Bank, I probably need to do a double think about that. Is that really the best inside there? So you decide where we're going to recommend, and admin council says where we're going. Compile a budget, submit it to the council for approval, and then report all designated funds. Yes.
In the last couple of years, have you seen churches change their procedures in county electing? What have you seen?
I've seen them move away from having the same people every week count. I've seen them move into where everybody gets an opportunity to count. So I've seen that change somewhat. As far as how they make their list of what's coming in, I've seen real good move of making the list. Here's the deposit that came in today. Now, sometimes they have that little machine, you know, that circles the checks through and makes the deposit. So they've used that. I've seen how they do that, but they end up saying, we deposited $1,986. It was this many checks, this many dollars. They got a report. They turned it over to the treasurer so that the treasurer knew what was supposed to be hitting the bank. And then I've watched the deposit, the Sunday deposit dropping off at the bank. And I've watched them finally realize it doesn't have to be the financial secretary that's got to take it over there, or it doesn't have to be one of the counters, because they locked the night drop box, put the key in the desk, and gave the packet to the person that dropped it off at the bank who drove by the bank every day. So I've seen people say, hey, let's make this easier. Let's don't make it harder, but let's don't lose responsibility of the financial secretary and the counters with that money.
So when they do that, they have to put back document or change policy.
Yeah, that would be one of those changes in the internal controls for depositing the Sunday morning offering inside there. That would be one. I saw one church that got a box put in. They had brick walls like this, and they had a box put in where they could drop the money during the week. Instead of requiring the financial secretary to come by every day and take the money to the bank, they dropped it in, and the financial secretary had the key that opened it on Sunday morning, took the money out, and it was part of counting. Trying to make it easier so that people don't feel like they're being used in a way that's just not fair inside there. But the finance committee has looked at it. Y'all have looked at it and you've made sure there's no way for something to get stolen. So we just got to learn to work smarter, which makes us work faster, which allows us to go about God's business and go about our daily work that we need to do. Does that help? All right. So as we think about that finance committee, your function and responsibilities is to give stewardship financial priority. Thank the Lord, the 2016 General Conference finally said the finance committee doesn't govern the church, it supports the church. That's when I moved to being we're the feet of God, because we're supporting the body as it's working. That's where that concept came to me. We explore ways the church council can turn the congregation into a tithing congregation. You see, that piece is the piece that goes in toward that stewardship committee. And there are people that like stewardship. All financial askings have got to be included in the budget. Lord have mercy. I've gone in churches and I've said, was everything in the budget? Oh yeah, everything's in there. And somebody will say to me, you know, the choir fund's not in there. And Cynthia, I simply said to them, y'all need to worry about that after I leave. I'm not going to be here when you take the choir fund money away from the choir. It's got to be reported. And my mama only raised one crazy idiot. He lives in Senatobia. When I know I'm going to get in trouble, I know how to get out quick, but I sure know how to tell what you need to do. So we need to be sure that all the funds are inside the budget. Now that's the ushers fund, that's the choir fund, that's the trustee funds. Everything needs to be in the budget because it needs to be governed. The internal controls need to control it. Now, whether I allow them to have separate bank accounts or not, that's a decision of the finance committee. But what's got to happen at the end of the month or the end of the quarter or no less than the end of the year, every one of those bank statements have got to come to the treasurer to be included in the records so that we're reporting everything that's out there. That's the reason I like one bank account with everything inside of it. But there again, you may have some folks who are going to say, that ain't happening. But they'll say, we'll give you the bank statements. Now, y'all leave the women's money alone. The United Methodist women, do not touch it. We will get in trouble. 3 of us men, I'm seeing men sitting on the counter. We'll get in trouble. Absolutely. We tried at General Conference in 2016 to make them leave the United Methodist men's money alone. And you know what happened? They shut conference down right before we voted on that. I am absolutely positive you women planned that one. And so we still have to turn ours into the treasurer, but y'all don't. Now, our problem was we didn't have the general governance of the United Methodist women because y'all had to report to them. And we didn't have anybody to report to, but I know who's president of the United Methodist Men now. I think y'all know him. His name is Bishop James E. Swanson Sr. And so if the Boy Scout stuff finally settles down, that may be something they take on to figure out how we authorize them. But remember, it's got to be an authorized group of the United Methodist women. If it's just the women's Sunday school class, that doesn't count. Got to be a part because the reporting comes in. So we've got to think through those things. We've got to be sure that we provide for the funding to make sure there's adequate income, administer the funds according to the plan the money was given for. I've given you a gift policy. This is the second big thing that you've got. Gifts come in, and if somebody marks on their check to paint this room purple, you got one choice. Is it going to be purple or is it not? If it's not, the money's going to sit there till the cows come home. If you decide purple is good, then you can paint it purple. But the gift policy allows the admin council to change how money is given. And that becomes dangerous to us. Because if I change what somebody gave money for, they need to be well aware and know I've got the authority. I've got 75 accounts on the conference books, one of which has $50 in it. And that $50 was given for a specific purpose and they hadn't spent it, and it's been there since 2004. So I can't change any of those things going backwards, but I can change them going forward with this. So I'd suggest to you, get that gift policy, look through that gift policy, talk about how we're going to do these things, and then we begin to move that into discussion with the admin council. The admin council adopts the policy. The church then begins to hear about that. And so if I started on that now, about January 1 of next year, we would be ready to follow that. I had a lady that gave $50,000 to the church because she heard me saying I didn't have enough money. She gave it to the building fund. I called her and I said, oh, what a wonderful gift you've given us, 50 grand. I said, but I got 100 grand in the building fund because you've been giving money to it all along. What I don't have is enough money in the bank account to pay the pastor and to pay the electric bill tomorrow. She said, I thought you said you didn't have enough in the building fund. I said, no, ma'am. She said, well, just move my check over. I said, oh, thank you so much. And then you know what I said? Would you run by the office tomorrow and make that change on your check for me? So we got to make sure we have ways of changing those, and that policy will get you there. Have y'all looked at that one before? The gift policy? You got one, great. Just be sure. Okay, just be sure with that gift policy, you have ways to change the gifts that are received, and the policy drives how you set up restricted and designated funds, because you're going to have to live by them. Yes, ma'am.
I guess I'm confused about the between the finance committee and the stewardship. The first two items, the first two goes on functions and it's confusing to me because now you're saying the committee should give stewardship, financial resources, priorities. I'm not sure I understand what that means. But then you say our function is to explore creative ways of church council to turn the congregation into a time. I thought that was stewardship. I always get confused about that.
Yeah, and both of those are the two steps of stewardship. First of all, how do we talk about stewardship with priority? We don't want the pastor preaching on stewardship in October and say we've done our job. All during the year, we need to talk about. We need to make financial reports. We need to talk about the fun things that admin council would like to do. We need to talk about the ministry we would like to do. And here's what you've got to do that with. How do you want to help us raise that? And then begin to talk about stewardship from that viewpoint.
Who are you asking how you want ways to raise it?
The people that are coming up saying, and probably coming out of admin council, saying, we'd like to begin to give money to Camp Wesley Pines for scholarships for our children that don't have enough money to go to camp. So we want to raise money to do that. Okay, that's a great idea. Now, how do y'all want to do that? Do we want to do that through a special fund, a designated fund? Now, how can y'all help us raise that money? We don't have to raise it. We got to direct raising it.
Is that stewardship or that finance? I just get confused in that area.
Yeah, that's the reason you got both of them on there. You got the stewardship committee as a part of the finance committee, so that they can dream and think about how we're going to teach stewardship, but yet the finance committee works together to say, yeah, that's a great idea, let's do that. Or can you rethink that a little bit and bring us back another plan? That way, the finance committee is looking at everything. So you as the chair are looking at everything that's going to happen in finance, and you begin to sign those things out. This sounds like stewardship. Could y'all check into that and report back to us next week? But we wanted to come back to the finance committee to make the decisions, because stewardship doesn't recommend direct to admin council. Stewardship comes into finance, make sure it's financially possible, and then we take it to admin council. And admin council is going to send things back to you at times. They're going to say, hey, we want to have a harvest festival offering. how can y'all set that up for us? And they'll send it back to you for you to begin to think about. So stewardship needs to start talking about, how do we teach stewardship around financial harvesting? And then we come back and say, here's what we suggest. And so we see how we work back and forth, but we're looking at how we do it and how we make sure we are teaching stewardship in everything that we do. If they come back and say, you know, we want to give $100,000 that's in our building fund that has $110,000 in it, we want to spend $100,000 on a purple water fountain back here. Finance committee is going to come back and say, really? Y'all want to take $100,000 when our air conditioner's on the last leg and you want to buy a purple elephant water fountain? Let's talk about this. So and that's crazy. It doesn't happen, but it could. And so you're able to talk back and forth with the different groups. So your job is not to say yes or no. It's to say, if that air conditioner is fixing to go out, now how y'all going to replace that air conditioner to keep the water in the fountain looking good? So we can't control, but we can ask questions. But when it comes to us and they've said, here's what we're going to do, what's our job? Raise the money and get it done. We can't say no. We just have to say, have you thought about it? And then eventually you'll get inside of that. And it'll give a lot of opportunity to teach stewardship as we go through that.
Stewardship comes through the finance.
Right. And things will get kicked back to both of them. But stewardship doesn't go direct to admin council because it's a part of the finance committee. So it's just a subcommittee, if you will. Mm-hmm. So the discipline, no immediate family, none of Cynthia's family can serve as treasurer, finance chair, financial secretary, counter in any paid or unpaid. But now if you've got a retired pastor going to church here, they can serve. It's who is appointed to the church is what 258 deals with. Who is appointed to the church. Their family cannot be involved. So please don't leave out your retired pastors and their families. Let them be a part of their church. But they're not controlled by this. This is simply the appointed family, the appointed pastor and their family. The gift policy, those next terms talk around it. The big key is before and in writing. Be sure we've established it. We've shared it with the church. We've made them hear it so many times that I think Vicki uses the word ad nauseum or something like that. Vicki tries to teach me new words, but I fight her. I don't learn all her new words. So make sure they've heard it, they've seen it, they understand it. And when it's in place, you're ready to go with it. So y'all got a gift policy, which is great to know. Just remember this IRS rule, and I had this give and take yesterday with one of the financial secretaries. She was all concerned about giving the report to the person because they had given a special gift and she didn't want to put it on the tithes and offerings. She wanted to put it on this other form. And we went back and forth. And I said, and how much was it? And she said, $25. I said, oh, what a nice gift. I said, you're not required by the IRS. She said, but the IRS says you got to give a letter. I said, no, the IRS says any single donation of $250 or more is what we've got to give. We got to respond to it. I said, but if you're doing a quarterly letter and you're thanking the people for what they gave each quarter, and on the back of this letter, here's the ministry we did on the front page. And by the way, on the back is what you contributed to it. Ministry first, finances second. Here's what you contributed. I have met this requirement. I said, what I'm worried about is, do you thank everybody that gives to the church that you know that they gave it, whether it's in an envelope or whether it's a check? She said, oh, yeah, we do that. I said, great. I said, then you've met your responsibility. Don't freak out over the IRS in this because you've met your responsibilities. As long as you have that little statement, no goods or services were provided, and this is our federal ID number. As long as I say that, I'm good. What I really want you doing inside this gift policy is thanking people for what they gave to the church in the way that Cynthia writes the first letter, first quarter. Second quarter, you write the letter. Third quarter, Pastor Parrish writes the letter and talks about all these wonderful things that we did during this quarter, and the money that was given did all of this. And by the way, thank you for your support, which is identified on the back of this letter. It does two things. It thanks the people. And when they flip over and there's nothing written on the back, they say, maybe I need to give some money to the church. Again, here I am back at stewardship again inside there. So that gift policy does become important. Budgeting is really your biggest piece. Because if I don't budget, then I don't recognize my vision. If I'm not looking at my vision of my church, where do I want to be in 10 years? And if that's where I want to be, how do I get there in 5 years? And I got a checkup point. And how do I get there in the next couple of years? The budget leads us there. I can take any one of your checkbooks and I can determine what are most important to you. My wife has her little private checkbook. And what's most important to her is her 4 grandchildren. Because every time I turn around, she's buying something for one or something for the other. She left yesterday, headed to Nashville to go to the basketball game. And she said, oh, by the way, you need to give me $20 for the Girl Scout cookies that you bought from Elizabeth. And I said, okay, I will. I'll let her get about halfway to Memphis. And I called her and I said, just write out of your checkbook and pay Elizabeth for my cookies. I forgot to give you the money. So now when I say, well, I see the kids are still important, she's going to say, you owe me this back. So I'm not going to talk about that quarter. We're not going to talk about it. But if people look at our budget, they can determine what kind of congregation are we? Are we one that are looking inside, which is fine if that's what we're going to do? Or are we one that's looking outward, which is great if that's what we're going to do? But your vision is going to be established by what the budget says. Not established, I'm sorry, it's a bad word. Your vision is going to be demonstrated by the budget that's inside of there. So when people look at your budget and they're trying to decide what church, I was so excited when I moved to Madison, because in Lexington, I had one church I could go to. If I wanted to be Methodist, now I could go be Baptist or Catholic or Jewish, I could be all kind of other stuff up there. I want to be United Methodist, and I had one church. Down here, we were so excited to be able to shop churches, and we were shopping for what the ministry was and what our children were getting in the different classes. And, you know, this won't shock you. I looked at the budget of every church. I wanted to know what they were putting their money in. If I put my money in it, I really have a thought about it. So as I look through that strategic planning, I've got to work with the admin council. I've got to work with the mission committee. I've got to work with the pastor parish, the trustees. What do we need? And we begin to read that mission statement. Now, the mission of the United Methodist Church is the mission of the church is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Everybody can say that. When you sit down with your programmatic folks, tell them, let's be sure we tell the whole story. And finally, the United Methodist Church put it in there. The local churches provide the most significant arena through which disciple making occurs. That second sentence will lead me to where I want to go. The first one's a great idea, but don't all churches try to make disciples in most cases? They really are. They're trying to promote what they're doing. But we realize you local churches do it the best. The process of determining our vision is just as valuable as the outcome. We figure what we're doing. So with strategic planning, where do we want to go? What do we want to be? How do we want to be looked at? And we talk about our budgeting. Formalize that budgeting. There's 3 different ways really to do budgets. I can either do a top-down approach, which is basically y'all sitting down saying, here's the budget, church. Well, that's really good because y'all know what you're spending. You know what the light bill is, the gas bill is. You know what the salaries are. You know what you're doing. But you know what happens there is members say, well, if y'all are so smart, then y'all just put the money in for the budget because you don't need us. You hadn't asked us anything. So the top-down approach is good. It might be that time that Stephen calls and says, I want to look at your budget, and y'all got to put one together really quickly and make sure it looks good. The bottom-up approach, you need to start that about June because you need to reach out to every committee of the church, every group of the church, and then every individual and say, what would y'all like to do next year? Tell us where you'd like to see the church go. And then you work your way to the Vacation Bible School Committee. How much money are you going to need for Vacation Bible School? And you begin to hear from everybody. All of a sudden, it's not 10 people, it's 100 people that are preparing a budget. And what happens there is it takes forever to get that budget done. You'll wear yourself out budgeting, just trying to make that happen. But what happens better is that everybody's had a say-so, everybody's been heard, and people will buy into the budget. I would suggest that bottom-up a budget be done at least every 3 years. 2 years is really better. And then the top down can be done in a pandemic year when we got to have a budget together, but we can't get people together to do this work. So think about those bottom up, top down, incremental. You know, this is the one that we're us accountants, we just love to do those, because what you do is use an Excel spreadsheet. You say, here's the budget. We want everything to increase 10%. So we just put that little formula in and draw it over, and it's just done. We just love those. They ain't worth a flip. Yes, ma'am.
So this year, this
Yeah, and it's okay if you're into a real push that you're trying to get things done. It's okay. I would try to figure out how I involve the folks. I would do the top-down budget. And then I'd ask the committee chairs, okay, this is what we're looking at. Are we okay with that? It's kind of a top-down, speed it up a bit, but yet I still have asked other folks what to do out there. So I want to look at it from all directions, so that as I look at that operating budget, I know how much is coming in. Don't make a guess of what's coming in. This really becomes what you as finance do best. How much money is being given? We look at the records. We say, okay, we got 86 giving units, and this is what they pledged that's coming in, or this is what they normally give. The offering that comes in, the cash in the plate, has run at this amount. How much has it increased over the past couple of years? And now we begin to look at what is the electronic money that's coming in, and how is that doing? And I come up with a number of what I expect to come in, and I don't share that outside the committee, because you don't want people giving to a budget based on what the budget is. You want them giving based on what God's giving them. And then you begin to talk about it. So you kind of hold the budget a little quiet until people have had time through stewardship to say, how did God bless me this year? And how am I going to bless my church? Or am I going to bless something else? But you as the finance committee need to do that. So never let people give. That's communistic. As Archie Bunker used to say, that's kind of living in a commune, so it must be communistic. Because we're saying we need $10,000, we got 10 people, everybody gives $1,000, we got it made. No. God bless people in certain ways. You've got to give based on what God gave you. So you use that inside of that. So you see, all of a sudden this finance stuff becomes more about stewardship and teaching generosity, and then making sure we're reporting accordingly. Beware of the budget games. This is the ones that'll kill you. I just love them. If you get my foot in the door, all I need is $100 on that line item. Won't y'all give that to me? Now I'm in the budget. Well, you know, we did a great job last year, but we really need $200 this year. And then the next thing you know, they're going to need $5,000. And just get my foot in the door. So be careful what you put in the budget. You know, Cynthia really wants to do thus and so, and she couldn't be here to tell y'all that today. And she really wants to. She was just in tears. She was so excited about what they wanted to. Let's do that for our new pastor. We just love our new pastor. Oh yeah, let's do that. Well, everybody else is doing it. Why can't we? That's one of the great budget games. But they do it. They do it. I had one of our renowned pastors come in my office early on as treasurer. And he said, I can't believe your budget is this high. I said, it's not mine, it's yours, but that's okay. Keep going. He said, I can't believe it's this high. If I take that amount of money and divide it by the number of people, that comes out to over $150 a person. I said, He said, and if you divide the Baptist by that, theirs is at 37. I said, how many members do they have? How many do we have? And he began to compare it, and all of a sudden, his 150 number was sitting down about 25. I said, isn't that interesting? You came in the door one way and you headed out the other. Don't let people say, just because they do it, they ain't us. We're us. And we're going to do what God is calling us to do. And we've always done it this way. That is going to be the epitaph on almost every United Methodist on their tombstone. Because we say that so well, and on down the road we go, we've always done it that way. I nearly got kicked out of a church. I went to a new church when I was in Cleveland. In Tunica growing up, we put Easter lilies on the altar every Easter. And it was just so pretty, and the cross was in it, and the candles were there, and it was just beautiful. Well, at the church I was going to, they finally said, okay, we'll buy Easter lilies, David, if you will quit talking about it. I said, okay, fine. And I said, and I'll come up here on Easter Sunday morning, get them in place. Well, I got up there, I had the cross looking good with the candles and had all of them on there. And I turned around, and there was the United Methodist women right behind me, taking my Easter lilies off and putting them on the floor. We don't put anything on the altar. And I said, oh, I'm sorry. Well, we'd always done it that way, and it looked good, but the new church didn't think we should do it that way. So that's who we're going to be. We've always done it that way. Financial secretary, if you just think about it this way, the financial secretary's job is to get the money, count the money, be accountable for the money, and get it in the bank. Now, how we do that, you begin to look at that. What's the best way to get that in? What about the money that comes in during the week? Making sure that we get the money designated to where it goes, and has that designation been set up through the admin council, through the gift policy? And the reporting's got to be in there. Reporting back to those that gave, thanking them. So the financial secretary is responsible in getting that done. And reporting to the treasurer. So when the bank is reconciled, they know what to expect to see going into that account. They've got to be bonded. And so you've got that covered through your insurance. Remember, I think y'all are not in the conference insurance. Is that right? We're not in the conference insurance this year, or you are in the conference? Not this year. All right. So your insurance, you need to be sure that they've got you bonded on the insurance package. I'll say that to the trustees in the next session. We need to be sure you're bonded, because used to we bonded everybody, and we were able to get better coverage on the bond inside the PAC program. So we want to make sure y'all get that taken care of. Use offering envelopes. It's not to find out how much people are giving. It's to find out who gave, so we can say thank you. Secure area for counting. Please don't do like one church did. They got the money, it was sitting on the altar, and the pastor preached this wonderful service, and people were all around the altar, and they were praying, and it was just wonderful. And the secretary went up, got the money, flipped it over on the piano, and went to counting money. God. So secure area for counting, use restricted endorsements, and be absolutely certain that the pastor has access to the givings records. The discipline says the pastor has access. So we want to be careful about that. The pastors will use that accordingly. We have conversation around that. It's not to say, hey, so-and-so's giving this much money, I'm going to hit them up for a good donation so I can get me a new car. They're not going to do that. But am I going to have somebody on a committee, finance committee, admin council, that's not having any skin in the game? Those are the people that can be the noisiest out there. You got to watch out. They can tell you everything you need to do, but they won't put a penny into it. It goes back to what we talked about Cliff Christopher earlier. If I'm not willing to put it in, why would anybody else be willing to? If I'm sitting there. So make sure pastor has access to those as the chair of the nominations committee to be able to look at that. Never cash checks payable to the church. I saw this happen. Pay to this person, and the person took the check that somebody else had given, went to the bank and cashed it, and then I got the phone call as the treasurer of the conference. Why did that happen? I said, I don't know, but I'll check that out. Well, they were going somewhere. They needed some money. They didn't have time to get a check written to get there because they had to find people to sign the checks. Y'all remember that problem? So they gave them that. That person left that church that had given that check because their money was given to an individual. Didn't know why, it was just done. So we got to be careful on that. The treasurer is the one that is the reporter for the church. They do all the bookkeeping, they do all the reporting, they do all of that work so that those financial statements are clear. We want to be sure that the treasurer is not receiving money, the treasurer is not depositing money, the treasurer is not counting money. The treasurer only picks up the sheet that says, here's how much it went into the bank, and then begins to do their work. We want to be sure that they're presenting financial statements, that they're doing the 1099s, the W-2s, the payroll reports. Y'all got that covered. I'm not worried about that piece over here. Be sure that you never pay something out that you don't have a supporting document. Don't pay it out without having a supporting document. I think I spent $30 on pizza. Can I get reimbursed? No. Give me a receipt. Oh, I found it. Here it is. Oh, it was $22. Gosh, I was wrong. I thought that pizza was expensive. Now, what have I done as treasurer is I have misapplied money because I failed to ask for a receipt and I gave somebody $30 when they should have gotten 22. And then you can talk about the other person if you want to. 2 signatures. If the bank statement is reconciled by the treasurer, 1 signature if the treasurer is not reconciling. That becomes really important inside of there. Now, a lot of churches will set levels. You know, if checks are more than $150, it takes 2 signatures. If they're 500 or 1,000, whatever you want to do, you determine what works for that. Just make sure it doesn't work by leaving 10 signed checks in the desk in there so that I can get the check out and then I can sign it and get it to go. The treasurer should always be the first signature on a check because the treasurer's signature says there's money in the bank and there's a budget line item from which to take that. I'm not overspending. So it's not saying I'm approving a bill. It's saying we got money, we got a budget line item. Then you need to pick 3 people in the next group of names so that they know what's going on now. The finance chair, the pastor parish chair, the trustee chair, they're usually the one that's in the most know around what we're spending money on. And so they're great ones to put on unless they live in Brookhaven and come to church up here. Well, they wouldn't be good ones to sign the check. So you've got to figure that out. One person said, you know, the lady that lives next door, she's a member and she's really a good one to sign the checks. And I said, really? Why? They said, she knows everything. She knows when the gas is delivered. She knows when the repairs are done. She knows if the grass has been mowed. She knows everything. I said, I rest my case. You are one smart person. And that lady became a check signer. And she was always right there and able to sign the check when the time came. So you decide who's your best signer in between number 1 and number 5. Now, this is the one I always get a fight over. And so, Cynthia, I wish this was turned the other way so I could get out that door just in case I needed to, but I'm going to take my chances. The pastor should be on the checking account as the last signature. Now, you can play it any way you want to play it inside of there. But I need the pastor as the last signature on the check, and it's for this reason. What if something happened, Katrina, that checks need to be written? In this case, they were trying to pay the salaries of the people that had worked the week before, and they were trying to get the money and get it into the bank because all those people had fled north, and we couldn't get the money moved. The pastor had been on that account. We could have gotten that money paid. I also had a situation where somebody came in and said, you know, Pastor, so-and-so's stealing money. I know they are. Pastor said, oh, no, it can't be. Well, they convinced the pastor that day that they were stealing money. So the pastor had to go to the bank and ask for the records, and the bank wouldn't give them the records. And the pastor calls me and says, what I do? I said, are you not on signature card? No, I'm not on the card. And I said, well, that's the first problem. I said, your second problem is you can't have it because you're not on signature card. I said, but I tell you what, I'm on my way. I'll go in there and I'll get it. I'm the conference treasurer. Well, I went sailing through that door and I told that lady, I said, I am the conference treasurer. I do have a sponsor. Here it is in the discipline. It says I do. I said, I need those bank statements. She looked at me and she said, here's the thing that governs our checking account. And it says you must be on this card to get any records. And I said, yes, ma'am, thank you very much. And I just came on back to Jackson. I had been told, we absolutely ruined a person's reputation because we had to tell them why we wanted the bank statements. Guess who worked in the bank? First cousin of the person we were talking about. They all knew it. There was a family fight going on. Now we're accusing the lady of stealing money. She hadn't stole the first penny. The person that convinced the pastor they had was the one that made up the story. The lady left the bank. Left the church. If the pastor could have gotten their hands on that record, we would have had no problem. The other signers were all kinfolks. Well, that should be at first red flag. Well, no, we have one red flag. That's your second red flag today. Got to be careful with what we're doing. Please put the pastor's name on there. And pastors shall not ever sign a check payable to themselves or sign their payroll check. I had one pastor call me and say, I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't get my paycheck. I'm going to just go ahead and sign. I said, don't you touch that pencil. They said, but I need to get paid. And I said, where are your other 4 people? They're all on vacation together. I said, now come on. She said, yeah, they're all good friends. The families went on vacation together. They're on a cruise. I can't get paid. I said, well, you must not have listened last time I talked. So talk to you later. Bye. Click, and I hung up. Well, after I gave her time to fume a little bit, called her back and I said, okay. I will personally loan you the money that you need to wait till they come back. But have you learned anything? She said, yes, I've learned that I'll make sure the paychecks are signed before they leave next time. And I said, well, how much money do you need? She said, I don't need the money. It was just payday and I wanted my check. I said, you are driving me crazy. And I hung up on her again. So I'm pretty good at hanging up on folks, but I called back and I apologize. So, I'm not real mean about it, but it is fun. Never make checks payable to cash. Mr. Cash does not exist. Funniest part is Mike Harrington, when he came to work for the conference one day, I told him, I said, he was going to an event, he needed some petty cash, which is all legitimate. I said, well, Mike, we'll make that check payable to you. He said, okay, I'll bring the money back. Well, he brought his money back. He turned it all in. Payday came. Went to him and said, hey, Mike. I said, I hadn't seen that $500 come back yet, so I've deducted out of your paycheck. Now, I'd written him a fake paycheck. I said, see, I went ahead and took it out of your account. Well, Mike went to fumbling. Dickie, I've never told the story in front of you. He was a fumbling and bumbling and carrying on. I just fell out laughing. He said, I turned it in. I said, I know you did. I said, but you turned it in as event money. You didn't turn it in as refund of petty cash and event money. Oh. So we see our financial secretaries have got to be sure we get it credited back to the right place. And the treasurers have got to be absolutely sure they're paying what they're supposed to pay. So never make them payable to cash. And if you do find somebody to teach them that fun, it's just a whole lot of fun.
And that's not my strong suit. So if it's not your strong suit, you pay. All right.
Well, you didn't send anybody else out of your departments. Safeguard those blank checks. I told you the story about the young man that stole the money, and they can really steal money if the checks are just laying on the desk. Be careful where those are. Never use a church debit card. Do y'all have a debit card? Thank you. Reconcile the bank statement report. Make sure your assets are in a lockbox where the valuables are. If I've got CDs or something in that line, be sure I've got a lockbox to put them in. And I need 2 signatures to get into the lockbox. If there's a CD that's in there and I got the right to sign the CD and I've got the key to get in the lockbox by myself, I just stole your money. We were all excited when Mama died. We went to Mama would take us with her to go to the lockbox, but then she'd make us sit outside while she went in there. So we were fixing to get to open the lockbox. We were so excited. And it took 2 of us, and there were 4 of us, and we went in and we opened the lockbox. And you know what was in the lockbox? We just knew it was something valuable. There were hair and teeth. Now you say, what? The first haircuts that each of the children had gotten was in an envelope with their name on it. And then all the teeth that the Tooth Fairy gave us money for were in our individual envelopes. I can't wait to visit about that with my mama when I get there and understand why. So now that we've understood what we're doing, what our responsibilities are, we got to get to the audit. Now, the audit is simply this. It's auditing the internal controls. So look at this statement. I've got to have an independent evaluation. No financial secretary, no treasurer, no finance chair can do the audit. Independent. By qualified people. You don't want my English teaching wife doing anything with your books. She's in Nashville. I can say that out loud. Vic, if you tell it, I will choke you. Make sure that you have qualified people that understand how to read the financial statements, because we're going to look to see that all of our financial internal controls are being followed, the assets are safeguarded, and all the rules that we're supposed to comply with are complied. So you see, as I work my way all the way through the year, living into everything, then I'm going to get to the audit. with the audit, then I'm going to be able to see these things are happening. And when I put the audit report together and give it to the finance committee, I'm going to say, and these internal controls are not working, or they worked well. That's where you as the finance team then come back around and say, okay, if that wasn't working, what do we do? What do we change? You rewrite the rules, get them ready, take them to the admin council, and we've completed the circle at that point. We started with the internal controls and worked our way all the way back around to how we get them changed. So the auditing is important of all the organizations. We talked about that a little earlier. The conference standing rules say who has to be audited and how. Y'all are on a local church audit. I looked at it yesterday. There is, Cynthia, I saw your note on the stats where something was wrong in the 2020 column. I don't know what in the world happened there, but I'm looking at all of them this afternoon because what happened when I looked at the stats, y'all had $150,000 thereabouts added down and it totaled to $8,000. And I ain't quite sure how that happened. That one's really puzzled me. So thank you for the information, Cynthia. We'll audit our work at that point, see what's going on. But y'all have got to get y'all's audit done. It's important that it's done by June 30. June 30 has a real reason with it, and that's why it's in the standing rules of when that audit is done. And it's simply because the pastors move, and normally in June. And we don't want the pastor to leave that can answer questions about what happened last year. We don't want a new pastor having to second guess what happened last year as you're thinking through that audit, because the pastor is on the finance committee. So that's the reason we asked for it by June 30. Now, if your pastor's not leaving, all you got to do is call your district office and say, look, we just haven't got it done. Can you give us till July 15th? And most likely the DS is going to say fine. But if pastors moving, don't let them move without doing that. You're putting your new pastor and your old pastor in a situation that's just not fun to be in. All the organizations reporting them in, and we get to the little guy that says, now what questions have you got? It's a huge process, and that's what we're known best for as United Methodists, is we got a process for everything. The problem comes is sometimes we don't work our process. We've got to work our process. So what questions have we got? Surely there's some. Aldine, are you awake over there? Aldine's awake. Okay.
You said all organizations be audited.
Oh, yes, ma'am. That all the Methodist organizations except the United Methodist Women. Now, they got to tell you what they received and what they spent, because it does have to go in on the statistical report, but they don't have to tell you what they spent it on and where they raised it, just how much raised and how much spent. They're not included, but they have to do their own audit, and then their audit gets submitted to New York. Theirs is included in your audit. And the choir fund, and the usher fund, and the Sunday school, and the, just keep on going. Yeah, it'll drive you crazy. And that's the reason when there's 12, 13, 15 different bank accounts out there, I develop a schedule that in January, I want to see these three. February, I want to see these three. And so then by the end of the year, I've looked at all of them during the year, and then I can get all of them in my hands at the end of the year so that I've got them all. But I want to be able to look into those as treasurer to say, yes, they're following their internal controls. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing because they're operating under your federal ID number and your authority as a church. And this is where we missed some of this with the Boy Scouts, because we didn't understand they were part of us when we chartered them. And we'll talk way more about that in just a few minutes. But I just want to be sure that we do all have that together. Anything else? Credit cards are fine. Have a policy that we've got this credit card. Here's how we account for it. And I have a rule on the conference level that no one has a credit limit larger than their salary. And that is very specific. And you understand why? Because if somebody charges something that's not right, I want to be able to deduct it out of the next paycheck. The card is owned by the church. Be real careful because they're going to ask the treasurer, the financial secretary or the pastor or the finance chair or somebody to put their name on that card. And if the bank asks you to do that, call me and I'll help you find a bank that won't require that. The church needs to own the card because we don't need to put the credit of any individual out there and then have the possibility of theft or something and it hurts somebody. So the church needs to be the one. And if your bank is not doing that, let me know and I'll help you get there.
We had a problem in Harrisburg, which they released the exact district name, but they would not verify it unless they had someone's credit to go before they approved it. And at that time, we used mine. But after they got it, after we did a year whatever, and they turned around and released it to the district. Yeah, I thought Larry was saying that.
So in your experience, the credit cards, when you apply for it, it's going to be one person is going to apply, and then after that, what's going to happen is the person that applies for it at some point won't be the trustee chair or whatever, but their card is still being in existence. My understanding is that that point, the card is just a church's card. And the guy or lady who applied for it, got issues and all that, was no longer on the hook for it, I guess.
Yeah, and I meant to say that the card is always in the church's name and the church's federal ID number, never in an individual's name, because exactly what you just said will happen, or that person might even move away. And now their credit's on, so you've got to get that. And that's where I'll help you go and talk to that bank to straighten that out.
Supposed to pick up an application in the first one, start doing that. So that's the problem with the call.
Yeah, but because actually the conference card is in the conference name. It doesn't have my name and number on it anywhere. And I've got a couple of folks, I know we bank at Trustmark, so I'll help you on that one. But we just don't want your name or anybody else's name on that card.
I'm sure maybe still that I had a church as a district superintendent that forgot. They forgot they had a youth account. And nobody was keeping up with it. And over time, somebody was using it, put money back in it, and it just got all out. So just make sure if you got 9 accounts, that you keep up with it. If you got 2 accounts, make sure you keep up, because for that, it was strictly good for mom. And I don't think they had that separate charge money.
See, and that's one of those cases that set up suspicion because, oh no, we just realized they had an account. Susie was the only one that could sign it. I wonder if there's any money left in that account and where'd that money come from? Where'd it go to? And then all of a sudden, what have we done? We've assassinated a character again, which probably nothing was wrong.
Well, they said it was.
Yeah, I remember that one. I remember that one. Yeah, and even if I take money out of account and put it back, I've still misused money, which becomes a theft at that point. Even if I took it all out and put it back in, I'm not responsible financially for anything, but I have misused everything at that point. My authority, my ability, my responsibility, all of it. Other questions? Anybody? Mm-hmm.
So regarding the audit,
Mm-hmm.
actually, the church.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be a CPA.
Then as long as you're on that internal audit, it can be done by anybody. Now, if you get into the second layer or the third layer in the conference requirements, which is above $1.2 million and above 500,000, I think is the other number, then CPAs have to do those, but you're under the internal audit, which is 787 of our 900 churches are under that. And if you've got a banker in the church that has done that type of thing, you got somebody that keeps books, that's the accountant somewhere, they're certainly qualified to do it. Now, you're going to sit down with them and carry them through and say, here are the internal controls, and here's how we do things. And that person will interview them, but they'll get that work done for you. And remember, I've got you. I got to find the right one. I've got one saved together for us, so I'm bringing you one. This is the fund balance report that we need to use, and it's the audit guide that's out there. So this is what has to go. You do not have to use this crazy report. This is the hardest thing in the world to me. I hate this report. You're not supposed to hate anything in the church, but I hate this report because it just won't balance. Maldini, it won't balance for me, and so like it. So if you've got your books on QuickBooks, or you've got it on Shelby, or you've got some system out there, feel free to attach that financial statement to this, and we will be thrilled to death to receive that. And they don't come to me, they go to the district office. So please send them to the district office. This is the audit guide. This is what you end up doing when you do the audit for the local church. And it's got, that's actually the fund balance report that goes in. And then there's an audit guide that tells you how to do the audit, so that if the banker's doing it or some accountant's doing it, they got something to go by. Okay. No, it actually goes to the district office. Yeah, she would send it to the district office. And that's where it would go. And I've got a copy of this. I've actually got 3 copies in this stack over here somewhere. I'll give it to you. I'll leave them with y'all. But it does have to be audited, but it can't be audited by the financial secretary, the treasurer, or the finance chair. So you may have people on the committee that could do that. They're not doing any of the check signing or anything like that. But if everybody on the committee does have authority to sign checks, or as a counter or standard counter, then I'd get somebody outside the group, just so nobody could say, hey, this was wrong in the way y'all did this. That's the last word you want out there. Okay.
How long are we required to retain records and they will be retained?
Yes, they can be retained electronically inside there. Just be sure you scan everything in that you think you're going to need. You need to keep all your, there's a policy on the website that will tell you this. It's basically 3 years of all the bank statements, checks, bills, givings records, 3 years that are closed out. So I would want to have 21, 20, and 19 on hand. Anything prior to that, I don't have to keep, unless it was paying for the new building, it was buying a bus, it was buying tables, fixed assets. And so what I do is I keep those in separate files so that just the plain old lights, gas, and water bills, they can be thrown away in 3 years. And then I keep those in another file, and they should be kept until you get rid of that asset. So I keep them in a separate file. So if I bought a 2015 15-passenger van, I'd have a folder that has that. And 5 years after I got rid of it, then I could destroy that folder. And insurance policies, keep them forever. Forever. We learned that with the Boy Scout thing because we were going back to the 1960s and 70s trying to find insurance. And the rule is with insurance, if you don't have the policy, then you didn't have insurance because you've got to prove you had insurance. They don't have to prove it. And we had one situation, they were trying to prove they had insurance. They found out the insurance policy was $5,000 and the company that was getting it for them was going to charge them $15,000. And they called and said, should we get it? And I said, no, because you'll save $10,000 doing that. So save your insurance policies. Okay. All right. It would go to Annie. Now, Stephen's going to see it, and the finance chair for the district is going to see it. That committee will look at it, but it should go to Annie because Annie's probably the one tracking those. Now, it could be Vicky. I can't think of Vicky's last name. Vicky Jones. Vicky Jones. She may be the one tracking it, but it goes to the district. I take it to Annie, and Annie will get it to the right place. Anything I send to the district, I send to Annie, and then she'll get it where it needs to go. All right, any more questions? So we're going to, I think I ran almost up to trustees. So I tell you what, let's do. Are y'all good with a 10-minute break? We'll get everything flip-flopped, so we're ready to go, and we'll dive into trustees.